Mabuhay! Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. What's up, FMA Nation of the World? This is your lovely host, Marya Dela Torre from the Philippines. And welcome to the next episode of This Side of the Blade, brought to you by FMA Connects. This Side of the Blade is a video podcast dedicated to Filipino martial arts from a woman's perspective. We explore the world of FMA and its rich cultural heritage and incredible techniques that has been passed down from generation to generation to generation. This group is created by passionate women practitioners, and it offers a video podcast that is unique and refreshing take on the art form. This Side of the Blade is a resource for inspiration, guidance, and connection for its viewers, and we're here to offer a platform for discussion that resonate with men and women of FMA, because we believe that together we can forge a community that celebrates the strength, grace, and indomitable spirit of men and women in Filipino martial arts. Our episode is entitled We have a very, very special guest that I have to say I absolutely love her. Why? Because she's very calming. So I'm very calm right now. Please welcome. I'd like to introduce Steph Tuazon.
Hi. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here. So my name is Steph Tuazon. My pronouns are she, they, sha. I am a shame and trauma therapist here in California. And outside of doing therapy, I also work a lot with mostly Pinays, queer, trans, non-binary folks of color, in kind of navigating connection as well as understanding what are the different stories in their body and how can we listen to them versus being really scared of them or ashamed of them. And so how do we kind of work with that as well as connect to others, right? And not even just others, but also connecting to like the space around us, nature around us, and how we can really listen to those stories too.
Let's talk about trauma informed. Could you please define, because a lot of people out there, a lot of our audience does not understand this, define what a trauma informed approach means in the context of Filipino martial arts, and how does it differ from traditional teaching method?
Sure. Yeah, I can try to explain that a little bit. So, one thing is I'm coming from a practitioner perspective, right? Like I do not teach FMA. I am somebody who's been, kind of practicing off and on for several years now. And something that comes up for me is just, how people do approach FMA or just really like martial arts generally too, especially when it is very much a physical moving our bodies. It is making contact. And it's something that I've really been kind of understanding for myself as well as my kind of, learning in even just working and figuring out my own trauma and as well as even like with the stories again of like people I work with. So when I think about trauma informed, I think that it does get skewed a lot of people, one, either being like, yes, this is super important, or two, this piece of like, oh, we don't need that. This is martial arts. This is fighting. This is, you're supposed to leave that at the door. You're supposed to kind of, separate that, kind of box it in and, just be present here, which, I can understand that too. But at the same time, I think that we forget that people come in as humans, right? As people, as individuals, and they come in with so many stories. They come in with lots of different things. Not even just even like history, right? Not even, it doesn't even have to be like things that happen as a child or as a teen or as an adult. It could even just be like things that happened that day, right? And I know that's something that we can all relate to of, maybe we were getting up this morning and, the dogs were barking and I dropped my coffee. And so, you know what? Okay, fine. I can do that. I can handle this. This isn't a big deal. This is small. And then maybe if we go out, to go drive to the next place or whatever it is. And now someone's honking or someone's cutting you off and, saying bad things to you outside the door. Again, not a big deal, not a huge thing. But because now there are things that have just kind of accumulated back to back, that maybe now when someone says something to me or somebody gives me a look when I get to like my next destination, and suddenly I'm in a place of like, oh, like, why did you just look at me that way? What's going on here? Maybe I'm now on a more of like a defensive, right? And this isn't to say like, oh my gosh, I'm coming in with so much trauma, I'm like so messed up and da 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 da. It means that no, all of us actually have these experiences and do them and survive them all the time. And so part of this is just acknowledging that, okay, yeah, like there are going to be moments that we're going to get pushed out of you know, our resiliency zone or our capacity or these moments that really feel like ourselves, and then we start to become somebody else that we're like, whoa, I can't believe I said that, I can't believe I did that. That's not Steph that was acting in that moment. I feel like really bad now because I maybe yelled at someone or bit someone's head off, right? And this is again like a normal thing that everybody does. But what happens is sometimes everyone again has such a different level of what their capacity is, what their the resiliency zone is, what their like this box that I think about, right, or this threshold, that it changes and shifts all the time. So maybe if we did sleep well, we did eat well, we did, do all the things that bring us comfort, then maybe we have a little bit more capacity, right? That these little things aren't going to bother us or we're not going to be impacted by them. But maybe, someone that we know and trust and love and care about, or one of our students or one of our colleagues, that didn't happen for them. And they're coming in and they're like, whoa, like what's going on? And so for me, trauma informed care, even if we're going to think about it in kind of like if we're, and excuse my thick outlook, right? I am not a fluent speaker by any means, but something I think about how I relate to trauma informed care is, hearing my mom say, ano nangyari, right? When I grew up, I heard that as, what did you do? Right? Because it usually came out as I did something that I shouldn't have done.
Oh my gosh. That's exactly what my daughter feels when I ask her how's school.
Absolutely, absolutely, right? And it's just a string of words, right? It can be
Right.
so many different things, but ano nangyari, right, is what happened to
Mm-hmm.
you or what happened,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's already embedded in the question that we're not accusing, we're not blaming, we're not shaming, but that is something that we're actually all socialized, or most of us are socialized into experiencing when we are being asked or questioned. Again, it is simply a question, and yet for at least I know for
Mm-hmm.
me, right, and for a lot of my friends and
Mm-hmm.
clients, hearing that question is, ooh, I did something I shouldn't have done.
I want to ask, what do you do? You ask the question honestly, and you don't mean anything when you ask that question, or maybe you're just curious. Even the fact that you're just asking with care, right? Like, hey, what happened? But then the other person hears it differently, right? So what should your reaction be if you realize that,
Mm-hmm.
oops, I think I triggered, I accidentally triggered something? What should
Mm-hmm.
be the proper reaction for that?
Sure, right. So very similarly, this piece of like, ooh, oh no, like what happened here? So it isn't to start, shaming or blaming or guilting. It's really to just kind of check in. So one, check in with yourself first, right? So if this is happening to me and I'm like, ooh, I said something I shouldn't have said, like, oh
Mm-hmm.
no. One, it's a very human response to be saying, oh no, and to give a lot of compassion to that of like, hey, wait, like something else is happening for me. And then the second piece is to just one, try to like notice what is coming up. So try not to necessarily take it personally of like, oh no, I did this thing and so I messed up and, I have to make it about me, but more of this piece of, oh, like something's happening right now and I'm not really sure what's going on. And kind of checking in with that person too of like, apologizing if there is something to be apologizing about, or even just this piece of like, hey, like can I get you something? Can we slow it down a bit? Can we take a minute? Can we take a pause? right? Just to kind of, again, like notice what's happening for everyone involved.
All right.
If that person is in a place to also receive that, that's great. It may or may not be the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like
Mm-hmm.
an example of your daughter, of you asking her how's school, and her saying like, whatever she says of like, I don't know, mom, like leave me alone,
Mm-mm.
whatever.
Mm-mm.
It might not. It's not about you, right? It's that now she's thinking about school where maybe something did happen or something was frustrating her or something is angering her or getting her into that like really big activation. So it's also her like giving some space and validation that it is okay for her to have that emotion. I wouldn't
Right.
say that that's the moment though to now like
Right.
correct her of, hey, that's not how you speak to me, right? Because that's not going to go in any direction that we want.
I hear you. I hear you. Thanks.
Right? And that could still be a conversation later of, hey, like I would appreciate if this is how we talk to each other. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and let me know if I can support you, or let me know if like I did something too. But in those moments, right, like seeing what is the need, and each person is going to have a very, very different need, which isn't to say that, suddenly all of us need to be completely aware of whatever possible need somebody has. It's more
Mm-hmm.
around, okay, so what happens when there is a need? How can we tune into that? How can we bring some slowness? How can we bring a pause to that so that we can, again, like come back to each other, right? Because when someone is triggered, they're not seeing you as you. They're not seeing me as me, right? Even themselves, they're not seeing themselves.
All right. Okay. I hear you. I hear you. So most people's reaction would always be defensive, right? Like, hey, I didn't say
Mm-hmm.
anything bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like a simple conversation now becomes um a fight, right? It will turn into a fight. Okay. So speaking of fights, let me talk about the challenges or triggers that individuals with traumatic experiences might encounter during martial arts training. What are those common challenges that you know?
Yeah, I think a lot of it even just starts again with like the language that we're using. Right, like I think about even my own experience of just kind of first getting introduced into martial arts just generally was I wanted to take a self-defense class, right? I experienced some type of harm, some type of trauma, and so to me it was I want to learn how to protect myself. And even just the language in that self-defense class was so hard for me to be in, right? It's already assumed that someone is going to hurt you, someone's going to harm you. And so, fine. I remember being in that class and being like, okay, let me like separate this from myself, that it's not, what's happening here. But yet, again, like, there's this expectation that someone is trying to hurt you. And so if you're coming to these classes to try to, build resilience around that, to build capacity around that, to try and like do something different and not freeze or not, you know, be so anxious that whatever happens at that time, and to try to have a different outcome, we're already starting to kind of build that when we haven't even built trust yet. When we are coming in already in a very heightened place, right, we actually aren't going to be very great at defending. We're not going to be very great at seeing what is happening in that situation. So that's again part of this like trauma informed piece, is that when we are in a stressful situation, um, our brains aren't seeing the full picture, right? So instead of seeing like out here, we actually see like just here of, let me get out of the situation, let me deal with the situation, like what do I need to survive? So we're not seeing that, oh, this is like Marya, she's so sweet and she's here to fight for my best interest, right? We're seeing that like something
Mm-hmm.
just happened and I need to like figure out what I need to get out of this, or I need to handle it in whatever way it is. So, when we come to these classes, self-defense, training, martial arts, part of it, right, is that trust building of like, okay, right, like I just went to this class because someone told me about it. So there is some level of trust, but otherwise with the instructor, I didn't really have a lot of contact with him. I didn't really know what he was about. So, even just again coming into a class, I think it's important to kind of like establish some type of trust and connection, and have an open dialogue, right? And this is like not even just martial arts, but just generally speaking, whenever we are in a situation with anybody, like, right, even us. It was before we even started recording. It's like, talk to each other, kind of like, check in a little bit, because, we need that type of warm up. We need that type of rapport building or that trust building. After we've done some trust building, now instead of being up here, I can come back down. And now I can, instead of like having this narrow vision, I have a bit more space now to kind of see the whole room. I can literally scan the room, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then this third piece about kind of noticing, right, again, like any kind of triggers or barriers is, okay, so how are people talking to each other, right? Like, are people listening to the instructor? Are people listening to themselves? Is this a welcome environment to someone who's new, to someone who's a beginner, versus maybe people have been, here for a long time, and, nobody likes to feel like an outsider. Again, like, I think when we think about trauma informed, it's not to say that, oh my gosh, I have to like account for every person's trauma. It's this piece of how can we create an environment where people can feel included, can feel a sense of belonging. So then to think about these like stressful events or these triggers, it's not even just about the physical contact yet. It's really, again, like, how do we start to create this environment that says we are an environment that you can come in, you can explore, we can be curious about together, and that you're not going to be doing this alone.
Wow, that opened up a lot in my head right now. There's so much responsibility that's put in the shoulder of the instructor. I just have to say while
Hmm.
hearing that.
Absolutely.
I feel that it's important, and this is an important message that I want to put out there, that as an instructor, you're not just teaching your methods, you're not just teaching your FMA system. Um, you're also handling different personalities at the same time.
Hmm.
So it the focus is not just about what's my curriculum, but also how is my curriculum being taken by the students. So you,
Hmm.
as an instructor, having taken that mantle, should also have that responsibility to make sure that you get that trust building, right?
Hmm.
Wow. I hear a lot of, like, I have had a previous conversation where I hear instructors saying that the fact that you're here, like what you said earlier, the fact that you're here, you should already be ready. There should be that welcoming environment. There should always be that welcoming environment, because we never know. We never know who has that trauma. We never know what that person went through that day, right? So,
Hmm.
in other words, just be uh always make sure that you think of others too, not just what you feel. How do you approach the topic of physical contact and sparring in martial arts training for individuals with history of violence?
I think that one is a really hard question, because I think
True.
the history of violence piece too can go in so many different directions. I think everyone's definition of that, just like with what is trauma, is very different. Um, being strong to overcome any like type of adversity, overcome any type of hardship, any type of, barrier that's come our way, and to use that as almost like a gift of who we are as a person, and kind of like this way of, this is why I'm the way I am and why I'm so strong, is because I've overcome all these things, versus also kind of leaving some room around, like, it is okay to actually kind of invite some more of this like softness and tenderness piece, right? Like, I think, one way to kind of like picture this is, a lot of times I think we can really overwork ourselves. And when we overwork ourselves, it's a badge of honor, right? Of like, oh yeah, like I stayed up and I did this, this, and this, and, I completed that, and, things are great. And then now when we are maybe like, if we are sick, and it's like, okay, I need to take a break. I need to like actually like lie down. And now when we're lying down and trying to rest and not, like working or doing some kind of like way of giving, that now it's like, oh, I'm lazy. Something must be wrong with me. Maybe I am depressed because like I'm not feeling stimulated. I'm not feeling like I'm purposeful. So in that same way, right? Like I think that when we aren't also honest with ourselves about like what are these things that are actually contributing to this experience of why we do the things that we do, right? So capitalism, white supremacy, misogyny, right? And how those actually impact of how we can be all are actually surviving some type of violence too. And it's not just like the physical violence of, wow, this one individual hurt me, but this piece of like, okay, no, like, when people are giving like little comments, if I'm outside, if I'm walking, if like we're posting something online, or if
Mm-hmm.
somebody is, trying to fight me about anything about my identity, right? Then that's actually still a part of violence too, but we're not associating that as like, oh, that's violence because, someone's not like giving you a literal black eye. Um, but, part of this is, okay, so when we are coming into a space of any kind, people have their own stories, people have their own, whatever it is. So part of even again, just like, okay, how do we work with this violence piece then? Is right? Like, how do we kind of bring choice back in? So, whether you are someone who's a survivor or someone who has actually caused that harm before, how do you also, again, like bring choice back in? And again, that violence can be in so many different ways. So, let's say if it is someone who has been physically harmed before, right? So, they are the survivor, now coming into a space where you are practicing the method, you're practicing your ones and twos or whatever it is. One way to kind of explore that is to kind of just focus on the movement itself, right? So just practicing the movement. What is that like in my body? What is this, how am I doing this right now? And kind of slowly introducing that so that it becomes something that, okay, I feel kind of familiar with this now. I can feel a little bit more comfortable with this now versus just jumping into, okay, now like, sink or swim, just try it out, right? Like that's probably not going to work. And, after we start to kind of practice those like ones and twos or whatever that, the method that we're learning, right, or that sequence, before starting to kind of implement it into a sparring, we want to kind of work our way into that, right? So, now from working with like stick to stick or stick to pads or stick to bag, then now it's okay, stick to person, like another person's sticks, right? Of like, okay, I can see this. And I know, we're supposed to think about, okay, when I hit my one, when I hit my two, I'm thinking about, okay, hitting the head, hitting the neck. And for some people, that's easier to think about that I'm actually hurting a person or hitting a person. And like for me, that's also really, really hard, right? Like I can hit a bag, no big deal, right? I can, and I'm good. But when it comes to now there's a person in front of me, my nervous system is like through the roof. I'm like, oh no, like I'll literally start screaming sometimes because I'm like, oh no, like there's a person, they're looking at me. I can see them,
So
right?
true.
And
Uh-huh.
and so that's how I am. But for someone who maybe has caused harm, right, maybe has also been like physically violent or had to be physically violent because that was something that they needed to do, right? Maybe they were a first responder where they have to like physically actually like hold somebody, or if
Mm-hmm.
they have been in some type of military of any kind, right? Like there are moments where we have to be in those situations. They had to be in those situations. And at the same time then, so how does that work for creating a space for that too? And I'm not an expert in that by any means. So I think part of that also is, okay, for someone then who's now been impacted by those systems, right? Maybe again, like a survivor who has been impacted by someone who's been in the military or by law enforcement or whatever piece that is, to now be with that person. And so part of this again is, how do we create a space where we're releasing each other as people and also acknowledging that because we're people, because we're human, we're all capable of harm. And so when that happens, right, how do we kind of work with that, be present with that, really also create space for whoever is being harmed if that does happen. But, I think part of it too is, so coming back to the question, right, of like, okay, so what happens then with sparring? So, I think building up to it is definitely going to be important. Some people don't need to, which is great for them, but that's awesome. I'm happy for them. And for others, I can see that it can also be a way where this is where they feel like really comfortable to kind of exert that power or exert kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, that they are better than someone else. And that part's not fun, right? Especially for someone who's a little bit newer or beginner, right? Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
not a great experience for them either. Um, and I think that comes back to kind of like the instructor, right? And like the class
Right.
itself. I don't necessarily think that like the instructor has to be the person to be like tuned into every single one and making sure to correct every single one, because
Sure.
that's just also not possible, right? We don't have like 50 sets of eyes.
Right.
But I think it is this piece of like, okay, like setting that example and being a model for what does it look like to be modeling, right? What language again are we using? Are we trying to aim to like hurt somebody, or is it more of this piece of, okay, let's just practice again, like this movement, try to get this movement back into our bodies, or see what this looks like in our body. So all that to say is, right, like I think thinking about that question, hearing that question, my mind kind of goes into like lots of different directions because it is a really huge
Uh-huh.
question.
As a person, before you even begin to enter the classroom, even before you actually sign up, how do you prepare yourself as a, like, if you've experienced trauma, how are you going to prepare yourself to get into this?
It is still somebody's, like the individual's choice and decision to come and show up to that space. And I think that most people who do show up in a space with whatever trauma they've experienced, they're coming in aware that they have that for the most part. And they're also coming in not expecting that something will happen. And that's trauma, period, right? Is no one's asking, oh, please let me be traumatized. Like, this is something I want in my life, right? No, like something, trauma is always something that nobody consented to. The person involved, the person who experienced it, did not sign up for that. They were not like wanting that. They're not asking for it. It was something that happened. And now they're the ones that have to kind of figure out, okay, this happened to me and now what? Right. So, I think part of that is, so coming into a new space is, just like I'm sure all of us have at some points in time gone to different studios or places and been like, ooh, I don't know if this is the place for me. You know, should I come here or not? And part of that is again like listening to ourselves, listening to our bodies, and being like, okay, can I stay here? Can I not? But I know that for me, I historically have been very comfortable to say if I'm okay in a space or not, when an instructor has also made that very clear, right? Of, at any point you can sit out, at any point you can take a break, you know your body best, right? So like I want you to rely on that if you do need to take a break, take a drink of water, whatever it is. Or if you have any questions, like please, like raise your hand so that I can come over and share a little bit more, versus if there is nothing ever shared or discussed and it's supposed to be just kind of understood and implied. I don't know if it is or is understood or implied, right? Like I know everyone comes in with the assumption we're all adults, we're all
Mhm.
consenting people, so we should just know. But we don't always, right? Common sense is not common. So I think that
So true.
right? Like I think that if it's not spelled out sometimes we forget, right? I know I do.
Mm.
Like
Mhm.
I know I can stop, I know I can say no, I know I can like not do
Mhm.
this thing, but sometimes, right? Like if I'm in, especially with other people, like I have that in me of like, oh, I want to also like do right by this person. I want to make sure that, it's not just like they're in class time too. I want to make sure that they're also having, an experience, and that I'm going to be a team player and also like work with them, right? Or like also, do that, the activity, the exercise, the whatever. And not try to like just be in my head. So again, I think that if the instructor, if a class also gives that kind of invitation, right, that people have that choice, that's going to be really really important too.
I like what you said about as as an instructor, you need to be able to say these things and not assume that your student already knows. You're right. It's common sense is not common. And I also feel I'm guilty of that too. I assume it's either the other way around. I assume a lot. It's all about the language that is being used. So that's very important too.
Sure. So like the language and like the modeling, right? Again, like if we're thinking about that, like, oh, I said it once, so they should just know, right? Like I said it, so people were hearing. But if we're thinking about how our brain is working when we are a little amped up, so maybe we're not in a full activation, a full trigger, but we're again like a little anxious because we're in a new place and it was hard to find parking and like, I don't know if I should be here or not. So our ears aren't going to be in that full range of I can hear everything, I can digest everything that's happening. Like again, if even if we're not again like fully up in that like full trigger, we're still just going to hear like maybe some parts, and that again is anybody. So I think repeating things is okay. It isn't to say that okay, if I say things once, you should just know it and that's it. I mean, that's why we even do drills, right? We do drills because we have to repeat that movement over and over until we like can do that movement without thinking. It is a lot of patience, a lot of encouraging, and a lot of it can also just be a question,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many
Mm-hmm.
people also kind of do like an assessment before they come into class of any kind. But especially like again, if it's supposed to be open to all levels, we want to like encourage that it is actually something that all levels can actually attend.
What if that is not the niche of that school because they want
Hmm.
tough love? That's basically what they want to teach, right?
Hmm.
So, and I don't think they have to like change their whole um teaching process because there's one student who has gone through a trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is unfortunate that if there's a school or a place that kind of just promotes like a very one mentality of, this is
Sure.
what we do,
I
and
mean,
if you
it
don't
exists,
like it,
right?
tough. Yeah. I don't know if that's necessarily a place I would go. I might find myself there if that's what exists around me and there's no other option, and find myself having a really hard time being in that environment. And again, like I don't think that trauma informed has to be as hard as a lot of people kind of assume it to be, of it being like, oh, I have to like make sure I get this certification or I'm trained in so many things, or I have to make sure that I don't offend anybody by doing all of these things, because people again can cause harm and offend at any point in time for anything, right? Like I would hope that all of us, including those studios or those places, right, that do kind of promote this tough love, that they're also doing that kind of internal reflection around like, okay, how am I showing up today? What type of person am I modeling right now? And again, like I have been in places too where I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I really like this instructor, but I'll come for this particular learning piece, and have to really, really like kind of block out everything else that's happening, but also knowing for myself, right, like that's probably not going to last for me either. So I don't really know. I don't really know, because if that studio is also under the assumption that, oh, we don't really have any type of like individualized approach, or we don't really honor that if someone is coming in, or like assuming that it is just one person that is experiencing that, again, like I don't know how much we're trying to change that studio because I'm gonna also say like there actually probably is a lot of students who have experienced and survived some type of trauma already that's in their studio. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know how to kind of answer that question in a way that
Mm-hmm.
feels like this is what you do, because I yeah, I think it would take a little bit more reflection and kind of noticing like what is coming up with the studio, and how are they, or whoever's leading the studio, how are they actually showing up in this space.
What strategies do you recommend for promoting resilience and self regulation among students as they navigate their martial arts journey with a trauma informed mindset?
Yeah, so for students, I think coming back again to this piece of choice, right? Like that's so, so important after anyone has experienced some type of traumatic event of any kind, or just really just generally too, again, especially, just operating when we're often not really, it's not very clear of what choices we have. So just giving that space of like, okay, I can show up today, do the best that I can. And if at any point I need to take a break, it's okay. I can take that break. I can, step out to go take a sip of water. I can step out and go to the bathroom. I can literally step out outside if I need to. Um, and if physically removing ourselves from that place is also challenging for whatever reason, it doesn't have to be that, right? It could just be like kind of recalibrating to the space. So this is something I often would do myself, of just like, okay, I'm here. I know I'm setting up for this thing. Sometimes if I train, it's like so early in the morning, so I'm not even fully awake, right? And so I'm not necessarily my best self when I'm training, and that's okay. But if I am starting to feel like, whoa, what's happening here? I
Mm-hmm.
will like just kind of anchor into like where I'm looking at. So I'll just like kind of literally look around, look for, whatever color I see, look for like a solid item, kind of notice, okay, like outside of me, like where are my feet right now? Like where are they touching the floor? What does that like sensation feel like? Is it solid? Is it soft? Is it rough? Is it fluffy? Is it, whatever texture or color or image that I can kind of like see and feel and kind of like just again, kind of grip into that a little bit because otherwise, if I get too stuck, and so the other part is this only works if we're actually noticing what's coming up for ourselves, right? So this is like before getting into a trigger, which often we're not able to do, right? So part of even kind of building this up is starting to practice that to do it when you're not actually in a situation where you are going to be engaging in some type of physical contact, right? So just on a daily basis, I'm generally kind of noticing how my body's feeling, right? So like right now, I'm kind of noticing, okay, my feet are touching the floor. My carpet is kind of fuzzy right now. There's kind of like a larger kind of like fuzzies that are part of it. I can notice like how my back is supported on the chair and the chair feels very solid. It feels like, okay, like it can hold me right now. Right. So when I can notice those, I notice like, okay, so I come back down a little bit. I'm not like on a full, like, getting up and up and up. Um, but that doesn't always happen. Right. Like if, like, because again, like trauma happens when we're not aware of, when we're not consenting to it. So if something just happened out of the blue, then I might be like, oh my God, like how did this happen? I didn't know. Right. Like that happens all the time. I've been in the car a lot lately, so I keep seeing a lot of car stuff. But like when you do see an accident, right? Like it's like, oh my gosh, like this is really impacting me. I don't know what happened. I don't need to all the details. I just know that seeing that, I feel some type of way that I need to take a break, right? Like I need to feel that I'm really like upset right now that I'm witnessing this. And I need to just like, okay, like come back to me a little bit versus, just jumping into whatever that next thing is. Even if it means, again, like a 5-second break, a 30-second break, it doesn't have to be that, now I shut the world out. It can also mean that, but at least for a few seconds, just kind of coming back to a place of like, okay, like I'm not in that place right now. That's not me that happened to. Like I'm in, my little like car right now. So I think part of just, kind of building our resiliency, building our capacity to be in these spaces is to one, like notice what comes up for us, even outside of that space, right? Um, so, okay, so for example, when I'm training and I notice that um, I'm starting to feel like I'll get a tingle literally in my hands,
Mm-hmm.
especially if I like get hit with something, right? Like just
Right.
whatever it is, especially if my ears get hit, I get like so just like hot very fast, and like I will feel the like heat rush from like my chest all the way up flush to like like I feel like I'm gonna like boil over when
Uh-huh.
I
Uh-huh.
get hit in my ears, and I
Uh-huh.
want to just like I don't even want to like whatever the drill is. I don't want to like listen to it. I just want to like go into like a full like back up, like what are you doing? But I have to notice that for myself, like okay, like I'm feeling a little flushed, let me take a break, right? Which literally can mean putting my hands up and being like, hold on, like let me take a second because I need to come back to that
Earth.
you're my friend right now and you're not someone else right now. Right.
Hmm. So what do you do? Like if you notice your partner in a training session, for example,
Hmm.
and you notice that you will notice because there's a difference, right?
Yes.
In
Yes.
your partner. So if you notice
Hmm.
that, what are you gonna do? What should be your
So
reaction?
with me and my partner and me, my trainer, what we've kind of figured out for me, right? And this is again like a very individualized response, but it does tend to work is because if we just kind of bulldoze through that reaction for me, one, I'm probably going to get hurt. Someone else is probably going to get hurt because I'm again like we're not seeing the full picture. It's just gotten to like very, very small, right? So now instead of me like okay hitting a pad, now suddenly I want to like really hit a pad, like I want to like cut through the pad. So part of it is even just naming it, right? So my trainer will be like, oh, like I see that look in your eyes, like, hold on, right? So if I'm not taking a pause, sometimes it means like the other person, like just naming it, taking a second, and it's like, okay, cool, right? So, and that's part of it too, is like, like my trainer also being really skillful in that and just kind of like rolling through it and calling it too if I do need a break. Because sometimes, it's in a place where, yeah, I'm feeling that like really big, fiery, bubbled up, and I can, just work the whatever the sequence is, and it's great, and then I feel better after, and then we're like laughing about it. But sometimes it's not, and it means like, let's call it for a second, take a second, and then like, let's come back again, let's try again.
Right. But that's so hard. It's easy for
Mm-hmm.
you because, well, I don't believe it's easy for you, but it's you can do it better because you're aware, and being
Mm-hmm.
self-aware is really hard to do too. And most of the time you'll just, when you get triggered, you just bulldoze with your
Mm-hmm.
emotion and then
Mm-hmm.
deal with the consequences after.
Yeah, yeah. Which sometimes it does happen, right? And part of that is, okay, so what happens next then, right? So like, if let's say someone is triggered, someone does get hurt, or both people get hurt, one, it means like, okay, can we create space then, for people to cool off, right? So people to cool off, and then to
Oh.
come back together and kind of address what happens. Because sometimes, depending on how, like what level we're in, right? And I do this because sometimes that trigger can mean you're up in a high where it's like that full rage, that full, like, that boiled over. Or it could be a low where it's like, I'm in a freeze, and I saw like the hit coming and I couldn't do anything in my body. And so now, like, I got hit because I just like saw it, and instead of like moving and like, knowing that I could do this. So I think both actually have like a slightly different response. So when it comes to a freeze, right? Like, it's important to kind of bring that movement back into the body and to kind of bring it slowly. So, really again, like kind of bringing that like empowerment that, yes, in the moment it was really scary, and you're doing the best that you could to try and like figure out what to do. And so then, okay, like, we can't come back to that moment. We can't change what happens. But as of right now, was there anything that you would have done differently? Is there anything that like your body would do differently if you could do that moment over? Right. And so it might be like, okay, I would have just moved my body this way. Right. Like, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It could just have been like, I would have just done this. And then so, and bringing that movement back in to say like, okay, like we can actually do something in that moment. We can do that. We can learn something differently. We can, literally rewire our brain to do something differently. But part of it is creating that space for it, right? Being really patient with that. If it's a high where now it's like, okay, I got so like boiled over that now I'm like full rage and it's not just anger, then okay, can we bring some slowness back into this, right? Take a step back. Hold on. Like, this is your friend. This is whoever it is. This isn't, whoever you were thinking of it at the time. Right. Unless that's actually what your friend was looking for, right? Because sometimes that also happens when we're
Yeah.
training. It's like, no, I want you to think about that person, da 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 da, right? And again, like that can be really helpful too. Um,
Hmm.
so all this to say,
Hmm.
right, is that part of it is, yes, the person noticing their body, but people aren't always going to know that either. And so that's why I
True.
think like instructors actually would benefit from learning more about this, because it can happen to anyone. It doesn't have to be because they have a diagnosis of PTSD and this is why, da 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 da. It's more like, this is an experience everybody does have at some point in their life, right? Because even in our like full capacity, when we are ourselves, we can still be angry and feel like ourselves. We can still be sad and feel like ourselves. But it's those moments where now it's, I was so angry I did this and I can't believe I did that, right? Or I was so stuck in like my frozen sad that like I saw that things were happening and I couldn't even like move my pinky toe, right? So
Hmm.
again, I don't think that this is only because somebody had a terrible experience in their life. I think it's,
Hmm.
everybody has stressful experiences, right? All of
True.
us who are have gone through the pandemic, right?
I
Like
hear
even
you.
that switch with COVID of
Hmm.
like, we're around people 24/7, and then now suddenly we were on lockdown and not around anybody,
Mm-mm.
right? Maybe one, two people, whoever your pod was, if you had a pod, right? And then to
Mm.
suddenly, okay, things are open again. Now just kind of resume when we're like, ooh, 6 feet. Whoa, hold on. You are very
Mm.
close. Oh, you just coughed? Hold on. I don't know if I'm okay being here, right? Like
So
our
true.
bodies are responding to that.
Initially, when you went out after that COVID, it's like, ooh, ooh, someone
Yeah,
sneezed.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I
You're
hear you.
standing in
Okay.
line and you're like, oh, back up. Like you're very close, sir. Like why? Can you just give me a little elbow room here? We are all in line. The line is not moving.
Yeah. There should be a 1 meter difference. That's
Absolutely.
yeah, okay, all right. So, but I think what's really important is you need to be aware.
So the thing about triggers, right, that they are basically like a reminder for our body saying like, oh, wait, what's happening here? So sometimes when we're triggered, it's the exact same thing, right? The exact same situation. Other times it could be like so when I was triggered that first self-defense class, it was the instructor came up behind me. And I knew he was coming up behind me because that was the activity. But for whatever reason, right in that moment, I forgot I was in that class. But him being behind me, I like completely froze and shut down. Right? I wasn't expecting that. Oh, if someone walks behind me, I'm going to be triggered. Right? So I don't think it's necessarily like, okay, if I have been like hurt in this way, it's going to happen this exact thing. It's again more of this piece of like, wait, what is going on, and how do I work with that when it does show up? Because if again, like I don't think we can always plan for, okay, this is going to be a trigger, this is going to be a trigger. Granted, right? We shouldn't be racist, we shouldn't be misogynistic, we should not be like, really saying some things, right? We don't want to be like fat phobic, we don't want to be very ableist, and yet people are, of course, going to say those things, and yes, those are going to be triggering when people say them. But again, like in that moment, I didn't know I was going to be triggered by someone being behind me. So when it's a full trigger, we don't have that awareness, right? Like but that's what our brains are doing. They're saying, "Hey, get out of this, survive." So instead of seeing like, "Okay, I'm in a class and my instructor is behind me," I'm seeing, "Oh shit, like I'm in danger." Right? So there isn't that we can't bring that full awareness once we're
Right.
in that like very
When we're
small
in there,
vision.
right? So I was like,
Hmm.
that's difficult.
Yes, yeah. So right, so if so this is where other people come in. And also, right, like healing doesn't just happen to one person, right? Healing happens in community. So, part of
Mm.
us being with other people is they are that reflection for us. So if someone is noticing like, okay, this person's body language has shifted, this person's like tone, their affect, their breathing is different, it's okay
Mm-hmm.
for us to like if we're noticing that not to be like, oh, but they should tell me, right? Because like they should know
Right.
themselves the best. So like why aren't they telling me that they're being triggered? Or
Mm-hmm.
you could say like, hey, wait, can we take a time out? Like what's happening here? I noticed something changed,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, oh hey, like can we take a water break? And so for me, I don't always assume for people, right? Like if I'm noticing something's happening for me because that I'm like and this is me being in tune with my body. So if I'm noticing that like, oh my gosh, like why am I feeling this like sudden feeling of, whatever that rush is? Like
Uh-huh.
sometimes like it can feel like I want to throw up. It can feel like, I'm like I want to like jump out of my skin. So I'll be like, hey, wait, like I really need to take a break right now. Like, can we take a water break? And sometimes when I do that, the other person will be like, hey, like thanks for saying that. Like I actually need to take a break too.
Mm-hmm. Or you could, and it's all right. I mean, I feel like it's also important that the instructor can tell the students that if you need to leave,
Mm-hmm.
it's all right. it's
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
okay. It's not shameful that you had
Mm-hmm.
to get out of this situation right now. Just be come back when you're ready, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
For
sometimes you
sure.
just need to get out of the room. Just need to be out of here. Ah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
triggering,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. I want you need to get back. You need to get back here because we're gonna have more conversations. I'm pretty sure our audience here, the ones that are watching and learned a lot from you today, and they probably have a list of questions. So if you do have a list of questions after this, write it on the comment section, and then we're gonna have Steph back again. I am claiming it. Sorry, Steph. It's a
I know.
mandatory for you now. We're gonna have her
We'll
back here
see. We'll see what
we
questions.
because we still have a lot of topics that we would like to discuss with her. Yeah, and we'd like to thank you. That's all. That's it for today. But Steph, do you wanna promote anything before I let you go?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I do appreciate you and Arlene having me here. It's been a joy. I do. And yeah, you're so sweet and so fun. We can definitely, talk about something else outside of this any point in time. And so something I just wanted to share, right? So I am a therapist, and part of my work in therapy with working with individuals is that I am noticing that even though we are doing really amazing work and kind of navigating personal stories and just, really remembering and reclaiming what's really important for that person, that something that I'm noticing a lot is that so we're doing this important work, and yet we're still in these same environments of friends and family, of work, and not really getting that same opportunity to kind of find that community of folks who are also on a similar journey, also doing that kind of reminding and remembering of themselves. So I am starting to bring groups together to kind of have that practice. So it's not necessarily even therapy at that point. It's more of, okay, let's build connection with each other. How do we kind of, tell this story of inner strength, where it's not necessarily even about bulldozing and powering through, but also like kind of honoring these other parts of ourselves, and again, even like the really soft and tender parts, or the parts that have been hurt.
Yay! Thank you so much, Steph. Okay, to close this down, I would like you to give a message to people who have experienced trauma. How do you think getting in Filipino martial arts would help them?
Yeah, I think that Filipino martial arts can be something that is a really healing space, to bring movement back into the body, and to have a new story, or to remember a story that maybe we've forgotten once we've had that traumatic experience, or when we have been harmed. And so I think Filipino martial arts can really be a place to explore that and practice, and again, like, really feel empowered that we don't have to repeat that same story, and to learn that we don't have to stay in that place. But part of that also is finding a space that is welcoming of that, is inclusive of that, and can work with whatever pace that you're at, because we are deserving of really finding that for ourselves, and being in community and not doing it alone.
We have learned so much today, and we thank you, Steph, for coming into our show. And we want you back, like I said. And I'm pretty sure our audience have learned a lot too from you. For me, being trauma informed is really super important. We really need to be aware of this, especially as an instructor. And we also need to understand that when we talk about trauma, we are not just talking about very like bad experiences. It could be just a simple thing that happened in a day that caused you some triggers, right? So it can happen. You have to understand that all of these little things can accumulate, can happen. So you need to be aware as well. Remember that when you experience or see someone getting triggered, do not make it about yourself. You have to check in with that person. That's one of the things that I learned for today, and I'm pretty sure the audience has learned that too. And as an instructor, remember that you always need to establish trust in the beginning. There should always be that building of trust. And your student needs to feel the sense of belongingness in the beginning before you even start the training. It's how you welcome them and make them feel welcome, and how you become a model too. So that's very, very important. Remember that I also learned how to bring the choice back in for you, for someone who had experienced trauma. You need to find yourself, and you need to be able to find a way to bring that choice back in. So, all right, and again, very, very important is the language that are being used, in the as an instructor, and also as a practitioner. You with your partner, the language that you are using is very important. All right, those are the things that I've learned today, and I'm pretty sure our audience did too. Thank you. This has been This Side of the Blade, and I'm Marya Dela, your host, now signing off. Bye. Hearts, hearts.